Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so glad you're here because, man, we have an absolutely fascinating journey to go on today. We're going to connect the stark, completely devastating historical collapse of an entire kingdom with one of the most profound ancient parables ever told. It's a story all about the foundations we build our lives on, dealing with storms, both literal and metaphorical. So, let's just dive right in.
What happens when an entire kingdom is built on sand? That's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? It sets up our overarching theme today and really highlights the massive moral stakes of the historical texts we're looking at. We're pulling straight from two ancient sources, the Gospel of Matthew and the Second Book of Kings, to see exactly what goes down when the harsh storms of history hit a really vulnerable foundation.
Okay, Section 1, Two Foundations, Rock and Sand. So, turning first to the Gospel of Matthew, we get hit right away with this incredibly powerful metaphor of an impending storm, a storm that's going to test the true integrity of our foundations. Jesus is speaking to his disciples here, and I want you to notice the crystal clear distinction he makes between just talking the talk and actually walking the walk. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father." The text actually goes on to describe people who claim they prophesied, drove out demons, and did all these mighty deeds. But you know what? Empty words or superficial claims of allegiance simply aren't enough. It absolutely requires true foundational action.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the parable of the two builders. On one side, you have the wise man who built his house on solid rock. He actually listens to the words and acts on them. So when the rain falls, the floods come, and the wind just batters that house, it doesn't collapse because it's anchored on rock. But then, on the flip side, you have the foolish man who builds his house on sand. Sure, he listens, but he doesn't act. And when that exact same storm hits, complete ruin. The house literally collapses. The big takeaway here is that the storm is inevitable for all of us. The only variable is your foundation.
Moving on to Section 2, the Siege of Jerusalem. Now, we're shifting our focus from a metaphorical storm to a very, very literal one. Enter King Jehoiachin of Judah. This guy was just 18 years old. Basically, a teenager suddenly handed the keys to an entire nation right in the middle of a massive geopolitical crisis. He only held power for 3 short months in Jerusalem. But the absolute most crucial detail here is that last point. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, exactly like his forebears had done. Jehoiachin is essentially the poster child for our foolish builder. Instead of acting on a firm foundation of faith, he just repeated the corrupt, evil patterns of the past. His kingdom built entirely on shifting sand. Let's walk through this rapid historical sequence of collapse. It's almost like watching a train wreck in slow motion. First, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacks, and the city comes under a brutal siege. Second, King Jehoiachin, along with his mother, his ministers, and his officers, they just completely surrender. This happens in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Third, the physical structures of Judah's power are literally dismantled. The treasures of the temple and the palace get looted, and the gold utensils originally provided by King Solomon are broken up. And finally, mass deportation. The walls of the kingdom have completely fallen. Which brings us to Section 3, the Babylonian exile. Now, it's one thing to lose your gold and your shiny temple utensils, but the way Nebuchadnezzar completely hollowed out the population is just staggering. 10,000. That is the number of army officers and men who were deported from Jerusalem by the king of Babylon. Just think about that. By taking these 10,000 individuals, Nebuchadnezzar instantly stripped the kingdom of its leadership and its core structural defense. It's like pulling the main load-bearing pillars out of a building all at once. Then we add this massive figure to the mix, 7,000. The king of Babylon also led captive 7,000 men of the army to Babylon. And the source specifically notes that all of them were highly trained soldiers. So the physical muscle and strategic security of Jerusalem were completely swept away in this flood of exile. And then, the final crushing blow, 1,000. This number represents the craftsmen and the smiths taken into captivity. You might be wondering, why does this matter so much? Well, if you remove the builders, the craftsmen, and the metalworkers, you completely eliminate the kingdom's ability to rebuild its infrastructure or forge new weapons. It is a systematic, highly intentional removal of any future foundation. Let this statement sink in for a second. None were left among the people of the land except the poor. The chief men of the land, the king's mother, his wives, his functionaries, all gone. This right here is what absolute ruin looks like in historical reality. When the house built on sand fell, exactly as the parable warned, the destruction wasn't just partial, it was total. To finalize this absolute loss of sovereignty and identity, the king of Babylon installs Jehoiachin's uncle, Mattaniah, as a puppet king. But he doesn't just put him on the throne, he fundamentally strips away his identity by changing his name to Zedekiah. The physical kingdom wasn't just beaten down, it was entirely hollowed out, renamed, and completely controlled by a foreign power. That original foundation totally washed away. And that leads us to Section 4, Empty Words versus True Action. Bringing this historical tragedy right back to the spiritual teachings we saw in Matthew, I really want you to notice how perfectly Jesus' harsh warning mirrors the reality we just analyzed. Jesus solemnly declares to those who only offered empty words, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers." Now think about King Jehoiachin for a second. The text explicitly said he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Sure, he had the fancy royal title, he had the palace, he had Solomon's gold, but he did not have the foundation of true righteous action. And the consequence? He was literally forced to depart, dragged away into exile. It is the devastating, inevitable consequence of a foundation built on sand. So this brings us to a deeply profound contrast. On one side, we have earthly power, represented by King Nebuchadnezzar's physical force, the siege, the looting, and that massive mass deportation. It's a terrifying force, absolutely, but it's ultimately temporary. It's destructive. But on the other side, we have true authority. Our source actually tells us that when Jesus finished his words, the crowds were utterly astonished at his teaching, because he taught them as one having authority, and not like their scribes. Now that is the kind of enduring, astonishing, spiritual authority that acts as solid rock. It's a foundation that simply cannot be conquered, sieged, or deported. So, I want to leave you today with this final, provocative thought. When the storm hits, is your foundation built on true action, or is it just empty words? Both history and ancient wisdom tell us loud and clear that the storm is inevitably coming. How we weather it depends entirely on what we choose to build upon today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, keep building on solid ground, and I will see you next time.